Good morning. I think we're going to start. So we have arrived quite early today, so let's take advantage of that and let's start. Okay? We arrived early, mainly for having the opportunity of having a relevant speaker. Today we will have with us Carlos Domingo, that is responsible of product development unit in Telefonica Digital, that is the technical responsible of all the development in Telefonica Digital. He's as well CEO of Telefonica R&D, our research and development department. So Carlos, it's interesting to hear Carlos about our strategy in digital. So Carlos, please. I don't know if I said your title right, but correct me if I was wrong.
Hear me well? Yep. Hello, thank you, Cayetano, and thanks again for inviting me this second year. So I was here last year giving a talk, and this year I was looking at what to prepare on the slides. And I was going to focus it a lot on what we want to do in Telefonica Digital, but then the last couple of days I decided to change the talk and give a talk very similar to the one last year, but with updated content. So first, how many people were here last year? Or you guys are all new? Only one person? Yeah, I recognize you. Okay. This is good. This is good because there's only 2 slides that are the same as last year. Everything else is new content, but the flow of the presentation is very similar. And basically what I wanted to do was not to tell you what we want to do, but to tell you why we want to do what we want to do, and then ask you some questions about what we want to do so you can help us decide what we should be doing. Okay? The second disclaimer is that I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a telco engineer, so I will not be speaking much about the network and about telco technologies. And I will be talking more about what's happening on the landscape on the business side, and especially on the internet that is impacting a lot of the things that we have decided to do in Telefonica. Okay? So, all right. Oops. I don't have the slides up there. Hello? Okay, so I can see the slides here. I can start talking and you will see what comes out of the slides there. Okay, so my first slide is about just give you a very, very, very rough overview of the last, let's say, 20 years of the telecom industry. And if you look at what happens in the 90s, through the 90s till the year 2000, there was a cycle, a 10-year cycle of growth for the telco industry, very predictable once we enter in the 90s, where a lot of media telecom conglomerates, I would say like Telefonica, were created, where mobile started taking off, and the kind of questions at that time were whether VoIP is going to replace PSTN or whether mobile was going to replace the fixed line, et cetera, et cetera. And that, the industry did very well for 10 years until we reached year 2000. And as you remember, around year 2000, this is when the internet bubble and the telecom bubble crashed. And then there was a lot of, again, some few years of uncertainty in the industry about what was going to happen. And then we enter again another very predictable business cycle for another 10 years that, a lot of the questions that we had in the uncertainty around the year 2000 clear up. So the telecom conglomerates sort of consolidated, and now there's less companies and bigger companies. PSTN is still there, so VoIP hasn't wiped out the fixed line business. Mobile hasn't substituted fixed, but it has some sort of complemented it. Fixed has been revitalized by the growth of broadband, and now we're entering the mobile broadband area. But precisely at this particular point, we're kind of again in a zone of uncertainty. Okay, good. You have the slides there. A zone of uncertainty where first there's some things that are not clear. One is what is going to be the next growth wave for the telecom industry? Because fixed line is declining, mobile voice is declining, mobile broadband is growing, but it's not growing to cover for the other things. And fixed broadband is sort of saturating, even though there's new technologies like fiber optics. It is not necessarily going to increase the amount of revenue, but just substitute one technology. But the other one, telcos which have had a very local-based model are facing competition from players that are very global. So what's the right model, local versus global? Is there going to be further consolidation? How many people are from the US here? So in the US, you've pretty much consolidated already. You have 2.5 companies more or less left in the telecom space. But if you look at Europe, which is more or less the same size of economy, we have I don't know, 150 or close to more than 100 and probably more than 150. So there's certainly a consolidation looking to happen again. But how is that going to happen? Who is going to merge as a consolidated player, et cetera, is very unclear. So we're precisely in this middle of a zone of uncertainty. Okay. What I want to tell you in the rest of the presentation is what's happening today that is giving this uncertainty to telecom companies. And not necessarily tell you what the solution is, but at least organizationally what we've decided to do and what are the two focuses that we have, and then finalize with some questions for you. All right, so as I mentioned today, we're in a situation where mobile market is maturing a lot, and the telecom market in general. So first, if you look at mobile, the penetration of mobile is saturating in Europe and in Western countries, and it's also reaching saturation points in Latin America as well. So a lot of the Latin American countries are probably 2-3 years behind, but they will catch up and they will saturate as well the market. This is very relevant for us, having a lot of presence in Latin America. So with some exceptions like Mexico, which is less developed, probably due to the monopolistic situation, but everything else is reaching the saturation point. The other important thing that happens is that the telco industry has always been a deflationary industry, so the cost of serving things and the cost that users pay for a service has declined. So the perception of the service is they pay more, but actually they're getting more for less money. So, but what's happening now is that it's not happening necessarily the same thing. So deflation with growth compensates one with the other one. Now growth is finishing up. So what happens is because deflation continues in the market, then the revenue per user is dropping. So this is a really bad situation because it means you're not growing and you're dropping the money you make per customer you have. Now, if you look at the other side of the industry, not the guys that provide the connectivity infrastructure and the telecommunication services, but the guys that provide the services that people use on top of the connectivity and services, what has happened is the opposite. So the last few years, lots of these companies that you know very well have had huge growth in terms of customer usage and this is very different from 10 years ago, huge growth in revenues as well. Because 10 years ago, there was a lot of users, but not much revenue. Now the situation is very different. Some of these companies are very healthy companies, making a lot of revenue and a lot of profit. Not all of them, but many of them. So this is a very different situation. Now, if you look at value, so how much value has been created on the market, then the same situation applies. If you look at the last 10 years, on average, telco companies have increased 1.3 times their value in the market, while technology companies almost twice, and internet companies more than 4 times. So they've managed to create, growth in terms of users. They've managed to create growth in terms of revenue, and they've managed to create a lot more value. While we're in a situation where we did that a few years ago, but now we're not doing that anymore. Now, if you look at, and this is a kind of complex slide, so don't pay that much attention, I'll explain it briefly, but if you look at why these guys are successful, it's been kind of like a virtuous circle around a few things. First, a lot of them have platforms that people use to provide services on top of their platforms, but they are the ones monetizing. So Amazon is doing that, Google is doing that, Apple with the iPhone is doing that, Microsoft did that many years ago already with Windows and is attempting to do that same thing in mobile, et cetera, et cetera. That has lowered the kind of the friction to create services and new companies and has made that there is a huge proliferation of small, very, very tiny companies that need very little money to start up. So this is led by not only the existence of platforms and massive way of distributing your services through these companies, but also the cost of starting up a company today is very low because you don't need to buy anything, basically. You can just use everything as a service from the hardware, the infrastructure, the computing, the storage, the connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. And if your company is successful and grows, the costs grow, but if not, then you don't have any upfront investment. So it's kind of like a CapEx zero situation, and all the cost you have is OpEx. Then what happens when you have so many companies doing the same thing, and if you go to the Apple store, the application store on the iPhone, there's 400,000 applications, but there's tons of applications that look like they're doing exactly the same thing, then there's a natural selection coming, and the natural selection comes basically from the end users that end up choosing the one that they feel is the best one and has the best user experience. That natural selection process has also made that the quality of what these guys do is much higher. Because basically either the quality is really high and very differentiated, or people will not use it at all because the choice is very simple, and switching from one service to the other one and installing one application or another one is also a very simple process. Then few of them actually make money, but most of them don't make any money. That's part of the problem we're facing, because we're fighting companies that are not there to make money, but to do something else. But few of them make a lot of money, and then the successful of those applications strengthens the platform. So one of the examples we have here is Instagram. This is I don't know how many people know Instagram or how many use it here. Only one. That works for me. Two, that works for me. Three, that works for Cayetano. That's not very good, guys. So this is an iPhone app. It's very, very popular. It's only on iPhone. It doesn't have a website. It's not supporting any other platform. They have a staff of only 7 guys, and they've reached 14 million users very quickly. Now, that has strengthened the iPhone, because when you have an iPhone and you have Instagram and you love it and you use it all the time, and there's 14 million people doing that, you can't switch to another platform. And Apple has done nothing to do that. It's not that Apple pays these guys to do it only. The iPhone has an exclusivity, like on the gaming industry used to happen with Xbox versus PlayStation, if you know a little bit about that. But it's just simple, natural selection. These guys prefer that platform because they feel it's better, it's easier to develop, better user experience, et cetera, et cetera. So they go there, and then users stay with a particular platform. All right. So from the 3 main platforms that have been successful, everyone with a different focus is on mobile. Obviously, Apple is the leading one with iOS, and that runs in multiple devices: iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, et cetera, et cetera. On the social aspect of internet, which is the other growing trend, obviously Facebook is the preferred platform. So these are the guys that have the biggest number of developers and apps developed on top of Facebook. And if you want on the search side or on the advertising side, the biggest player on the platform space is Google, because you can basically leverage their advertising infrastructure to place advertising in your services in a very simple way. And that strengthens Google, because then Google has more eyeballs coming from third-party sites, which then is easier to attract advertisers, and they make more money. Okay? So out of this, the last few years, probably the most significant thing and this is one of the slides I had last year for the ones that were here. So this slide is 1 year old. It's from Morgan Stanley. And if you look at this slide, it shows what has been the most relevant thing that has happened in the industry has been mobile internet. So the way to look at this slide is on the horizontal axis, you have the number of quarters since the launch of one product that it takes to ramp up to 1 million, I think it's 1 million users. No, well, they have different million subscribers, so 20 million subscribers. So if you look at the bottom one, that's American Online. Again, the Americans in the room, and I was living in the US at that time, will remember that the US was flooded with these CDs from American Online. So you would then go and get online on the internet using dial-up connections. Look at how long it took American Online to reach 20 million subscribers. It took them all 19 quarters, okay? So if you go up, then iMode launched in Japan. That was the first mobile internet. I actually lived in Japan around that time as well, so I remember that very clearly when iMode launched. And then iMode, it took them 19 quarters to reach 40 million subscribers, and being only in one country and much smaller country. So that was a very, very successful thing. But if you keep looking at, and you look at Netscape, for instance, so Netscape took them 19 quarters, more or less the same as iMode, to get to 40 million subscribers. But if you look at the green line on the left, that's how fast Apple has grown the mobile internet. So that's the number of iPhones and iPod Touch that Apple sold. Is more than 80 million, 86 million in just 11 quarters. Okay? So mobile internet has grown much faster than anything that has happened before, and it's a total reality now, and I'll give you some more services later. So and if you look at the iPad now, and this is again a similar slide, so this is the number of quarters, 1 to 3, and this is the number of shipments. If you look at how when Apple launched the iPod, it took them a very long time to grow, and at the beginning was very slow, so it doesn't even show up here. The first 3 quarters were irrelevant. If you look at the iPhone, the 3rd quarter, they were already close to 4 million. But if you look at how fast the iPad has grown in just 3 quarters, they've exceeded 14 million. So every new device that comes into the market seems to be growing faster. And this is mobile internet, but if you look at other things like Kinect from Microsoft is actually the fastest selling gadget ever of the history, because it sold much faster to reach 10 million units. So, and as I said, so mobile internet is taking off in terms of users, but if you look at but the services that are successful on internet, they're very, very rapidly moving into mobile. So the usage of those services is becoming primarily mobile. So Facebook has, 2 years ago, it had already 1/4 of their users, mainly mobile. Mobile users are way more active because social is something you do throughout the whole day, and if you carry Facebook in your phone, then you interact a lot more than when you're sitting on your desktop. The figure now is half, so half of Facebook users are on mobile. Twitter was mobile from the beginning, if you want, because I don't know if you remember when Twitter started, the only way to post in Twitter was through SMS, and that's why it's 140 characters, thanks to the telco industry limitations. So then those guys started mobile and then went to the web, but have become primarily mobile, and more than half the users are mobile. Same for Spotify. Shazam started mobile. Now they have web versions, but 50% users still mobile. Pandora started in desktop internet, moved to mobile, and now the biggest growth is mobile, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these services are moving to mobile, okay? And if you look how those services are being used, it's primarily used through mobile apps. And this is relevant because mobile apps are not the same as websites, are very different things, and in terms of the impact that has on networks is very different as well, because those apps are designed thinking that you're designing a desktop app, but it actually runs on the mobile. And if you look at what people do with mobile phones, web apps is very small, so it's just 12% of people actually browsing the mobile to use the web. Communication services, which used to be the primary usage for your mobile phone, is now around 1/4, and some of that is not even our own communication services, but is over-the-top communication services. Email, which used to be, if you had a BlackBerry, 90% of your time you were doing email. Now email is a very small activity on mobile, and 40%, close to 50%, sorry, 40 minutes, is everything else that you do with your mobile, which is basically consuming mobile apps for social networking, for maps, for games, et cetera, et cetera. So mobile has become a platform to do something else that was intended initially, which was communication. It has evolved as a personal computing device where you're doing all sorts of things through mobile apps, okay? Now, if mobile apps is the future, because all services are moving mobile, and in mobile people don't use the web but use mobile apps, there's a lot of people that are predicting that the web is dead. And by the web, it doesn't mean the internet, it means the web. It means people will not be, obviously you will be connected to the internet because all those apps are connected to the internet, but the web, as we know it today, is dead because people will primarily be using services through mobile and primarily through mobile apps. Does anyone agree with this? No? Okay. So, I'm going to give you two different views, why I agree and disagree, because I don't have a clear answer to this. But one theory that supports that this is probably true is the following. If you look at how much it costs, what is the cost, let me put it this way, at what speed the cost of providing storage is decreasing over time. Storage is decreasing really, really, really fast. Okay, so the higher this rate, it means that the more the utilities dollar per euro is dropping. Okay, if you look at the next line, processing power is actually not decreasing in cost as fast as storage. So today, if you buy storage and processing power, you buy it 5 years from now, storage will be a lot more powerful from the same cost of unit. Okay, and if you look at the network is actually the one that is declining in price at the slowest rate. So what does this mean? This means that 10 years from now, and you guys were here today looking at 10 years, if this continues being true, you will have a lot more storage than you have now, some more storage processing, but not much more network capacity. Because for the same cost, you will be able to buy a lot more storage, some more processing, but not much more network capacity. And that's problematic. Why is problematic? Because when people design services, they have to think about where the power is going to be, and depending where the power is, you decide to place or design your services one way or another one. Certainly, if the network is the one that is improving at the slowest rate, you don't want your network services to be too network dependent, because then someone that doesn't do network depending and doing, let's say, storage depending, they will have a much better performance. Okay? And this tells you that things will move to the edge, but will move to both sides of the edge. We'll move to the device on one side, and we'll move to the inside the network, so the servers on the other side, but not only inside the network, because if you move everything inside the network and everything is pure web-based, pure cloud-based, this tells you that there will be a bottleneck with the network, okay? So that's one view. And this view is what Microsoft thinks. That's why Microsoft has a strategy of software plus services, because they argue that pure web-based services where everything is on the cloud will not be scalable. And if you distribute the computing and you put some on the device and you put some on the network, then that will scale the services much better and it will provide a better user experience. And that's very relevant for you guys designing networks because it has an impact in terms of how people is going to use the network. Obviously, this is not what Google thinks. And I was last week in Paris at Le Web, and Eric Smith was there. And Eric Smith is the chairman of Google now. He's also talks like a politician more than a businessman these days. And he was basically, his message was there because he came from Brussels, he went to see Sarkozy, et cetera, et cetera. His message to the industry was, we have to get connectivity much cheaper. Connectivity has to be cheaper. The regulators shouldn't bother Google, they should bother the telcos even more than they're already doing, and make connectivity very cheap. Why? Because they know that if this is true, the ones that have a pure cloud-based strategy are not going to be as competitive as the one that have a mix of software plus services, which will be Apple and Microsoft, okay? Now, the other view of the world is that that's not true, because web-based technologies are going to improve at a much faster rate to take over the quality of what you could do with services, software running on the devices, okay? This is an example on the Financial Times website. These guys are very much interested in bypassing the application store from Apple because it's subscription-based. If you are subscription-based on Apple, it means you have to give 30% of your subscription cost to Apple because Apple basically prohibits that you charge through an app unless it's gone through the payment system, and if it goes through their payment system, then they take a 30% cut, okay? So talk about monopolies or abusing power. But anyway, so these guys are a very well-known brand, the Financial Times, at least in Europe, and they've decided to go all pure mobile, pure web mobile, okay? They've done a website that works on the iPad that is subscription-based, so you have to register and you have to pay. They have 1 million users, okay? 45% of them have saved the web app to the home screen, which means from the user experience perspective, it looks like you have a native app because you have an icon, you click the icon and boom, the browser starts with the website. So it looks like you're opening an app, even though you're not doing that. And 15% of the new digital consumer subscriptions are coming from this website, which is in mobile, okay? So which one do you think is the native one and which one you think is the HTML5? Because these guys have a native app before. Anyone wants to guess? Come on, guys. Huh? Yes, you're sleepy. The answer is I don't know, because I stole this slide from someone else, and I don't know which one is the answer. But it doesn't matter, because they're so close that it's impossible to know, and that's the whole point of this slide, okay? I took this from a friend, it's Ricardo Varela, so I'm not stealing from anyone, but from people I know, so if they complain, I can talk to them and invite them a beer or whatever. So, but these slides, these two websites look so similar, the website and the app, that from the user perspective, from the user experience, is also practically the same, that for consumers shouldn't matter. So application stores and building native apps on mobile is something that might disappear if technologies like HTML5, CSS3, jQuery, et cetera, they take off and they become as powerful and as easy to develop, because part of the problem today is you don't have development tools for these things, as what you have today on native apps. So it's not just a technology problem, but it's more of a, let's say, industry standards and application development frameworks problem. Okay. So why is these things are impacting operators? Okay. So these four things that are happening that are impacting operators. Okay. Because you could think, okay, these guys are doing this, that, people are fighting the mobile web versus apps, but we could not care and we can continue carry on with our business and happily live after. But that's not the case, because everything you've seen in the previous slides has created four things. The first one is market maturity, which I've discussed it already. So the market is mature and there's not much growth in user penetration. The other one is price arbitrage, and this is an interesting one, which is related to cannibalization risk. So the two ones in the middle are more or less the same. What is happening today is that mobile apps are becoming so powerful, and people are on mobile internet, you're all the time connected, you have a personal computing device in your hand, that then you're capable of then starting substituting some of the services that we used to give from the network, and voice or messaging are the two primary examples, okay? So how many people here use WhatsApp? Okay, that's a lot more than Instagram. I don't know if I should be scared or not. So WhatsApp, if you use it, it has, let's say, all the advantages of a telco standard because it has quality of experience to some extent, because even if the network doesn't guarantee mobile broadband connectivities are good enough that when you send the message, it reaches the other side, and these guys figure out to provide certain quality of service without owning the network, so they are kind of replacing that as well. It has native native handset integration. So one of the advantages of telco standards was that then you could go to the device manufacturers and they will natively integrate, like say, SMS on your phones or MMS on your phones. Now with the smartphones, it doesn't matter. Because if you look at how WhatsApp is integrated with the phone, it's as well integrated as any other application. And in some operating systems like Android, it's even worse because it's even more integrated with the operating system. So going through the standard route to provide native integration is not necessary anymore. Quality of service for things like messaging is not necessary. For voice, as we start deploying LTE, it will happen exactly the same thing. And the third advantage was interoperability. So standards were there to provide interoperability, but how many of you have problems with interoperability with WhatsApp? None, because I install it, you install it, and then we communicate. It's interoperable just by the fact that we put it on the device. So this is very scary because we still make the majority of our revenue comes from voice, ton of money comes from messaging, and these guys, these applications, people can replace them with some other ones that are free, and that's where the biggest problem comes because these companies are not incentivized to charge for the service. Okay, why they're not incentivized to charge for the service? Because they think that, that if you talk to anyone in the internet industry, especially entrepreneurs, and if you ask them what's their number one priority, their number one priority is always usage, growth. So they always want to have the best user experience in their application so it grows, and a lot of people use it. And the answer is, so what are you doing for monetization? And they say, well, this will come later. So once I have a huge installed user base, monetization will come. And because this has happened successfully in the past, so if you look at Google, they did that. Google didn't have a business model for a long time and didn't monetize for a long time. And once they create a huge user base, then they started monetizing. Facebook is the same thing. So Facebook hasn't monetized until very recently. Twitter is not monetizing today, almost nothing. So they just started recently. I don't know if you've seen the new Twitter app, but the changes they've done in the UI are telling me that they're going to start placing ads in different parts. But those companies have wait first to build a huge user base, and then either you monetize or you sell the company to someone else that is going to figure out how to monetize it, like Microsoft has done acquiring Skype, thinking that they'll be able to monetize the user base from Skype. And this is very complicated for us because how do you compete with that kind of attitude? Because we will cannibalizing our services if we do that. If we don't cannibalize our services, they'll cannibalize our services, and then we lose the customer relationship because it's not only about the revenue, but it's also about the user relationship. When today you use a cell phone, you're using services from an operator, you have a billing relationship with the operator, etc. In the future, if those guys are providing all the services and just the connectivity, this will be like a pure utility business, which is probably not a very good future for us. And then the fourth one is data imbalance. So you will see later, one is like our traffic growth, and the majority of the traffic is video today, and is either direct downloads or streaming video, and that is very imbalanced because a lot of traffic comes from one direction towards the other one, and not much on that direction. So a lot comes towards our customers, and our customers, to get that data back, they don't need to request that much. So there's a huge imbalance, and the internet used to be very symmetric, if you want, in terms of traffic being back and forth between operators. Now it's hugely imbalanced, and originally the internet structure was designed for symmetry in terms of how people pay each other, etc., etc. Now the internet is becoming very asymmetric, and that data imbalance makes that some people have a lot of cost because they receive a lot of traffic, but have not much revenue because you're on a peering agreement with someone else and you're not getting any money for all that traffic that you're getting. That forces you to upgrade your infrastructure. Okay, so traffic growth. As I mentioned, I think I've seen in the newspapers yesterday, someone was saying mobile is going to grow 1,000 times for 2020. I think you said it. This guy wanted to be on the newspaper, so he said something really exaggerated, so he will be on the headline, which he did. So the reports I've seen from his team says that mobile traffic, the next 5 years, this is 5 years, so maybe
it's 5 years, but if you take into account 10 years, and starting from 2010, this from 500 to 1,000 times. This is what Cisco said.
Okay, mobile only.
Mobile.
Okay. So I saw with your boss a few days ago these numbers. So, and this is just 5 years. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, the point of this is that traffic is going to grow a lot, and that's for sure. No matter how, it depends who is giving you the statistics. They're incentivized to tell you something else is slightly different going to happen. But there's no one that tells you traffic is not going to grow. First, because it's obvious it's growing, and second, because a lot of the people that provide this data, some of you probably work for some of those companies, are incentivized to convince us that traffic is going to grow a lot, and please buy more of our network gear and infrastructure, because otherwise, the world will collapse. Okay, but anyway, traffic is growing, and the key things here is smartphones are going to become the predominant mobile devices. In these statistics that I got, it says that 70% probably means 100% of whoever is going to use mobile internet, because the same will happen with fixed lines, that it's never going to be 100% of ADSL penetration, because some people, or ADSL or broadband, because some people will not use internet for whatever, because they're too old, or because there's level is too low, whatever. But if you remove that part of the population, 70% is probably means saturation. So everyone will have a smartphone, and everyone will connect to mobile internet. And on the other side, on the fixed line, well, the traffic, obviously, the growth is obviously video, HD. I am happy to have fiber connection at home, and I can tell you, streaming, HD videos. Telefonica has a video on demand service, and streaming HD, if you have fiber, and I have only 50 megabits, but it's just almost instant in a huge screen. So is that something else going to come later? Because we could go beyond HD with that kind of connectivity already. You could have to Ultra HD or things like that. But certainly content is going to move to a much higher quality and video. And also, all consoles, I don't know if you've seen the latest announcement by Microsoft with Xbox, they're all going to be connected. They're all going to try to become kind of like entertainment devices for streaming content. The same with the TVs, all Samsung, LG, etc. Most of today's TVs come with internet connections and with some sort of video services built in, etc., etc. So you've probably seen this slide somewhere else. This is one I used last year. This is a popular one in Telefonica because it shows what could happen in the future if this situation of market saturation, okay, and growth of traffic, some price arbitrage in some of the other services that we have happens, which will mean lower revenues. Revenues not only will saturate, but will start to decline. Actually, they are already declining in some countries like Spain. But because traffic continues growing and it's not clear what are you going to do in terms of cost to reduce the cost, then this could decouple completely, and therefore you could have networks that are unsustainable. I saw a report in GigaOM, which is one popular technology website in the US. It's on Malik is the guy that writes that. I can't remember which vendor, because obviously this was written by a vendor, but they were basically saying that in the US by 2015, at the rate that mobile broadband was declining and the traffic was growing, and the cost to provide the traffic was going to be unsustainable, completely unsustainable. So there's a lot of all these reports saying that the internet is unsustainable because this situation is going to happen. I tend to be more optimistic, thinking that we'll figure out, you guys will help us to figure out how to make things cheaper, or we'll figure out how to route traffic more efficiently. Telcos will use more CDN, so you will control how video gets distributed in a more efficient way. So this the cost gets not controlled because the cost of building networks decreases much faster, but just because you control how traffic flows here and there. There could be things about different interconnection models. So as I mentioned to you, there's a lot of data imbalance between networks. If the data imbalance starts to be something you can monetize because you tell the other guy, look, you're sending me 60 times more traffic that I'm sending to you, you have to pay me for that, otherwise I'm not going to upgrade my link connectivity to you, and your customers are going to suffer, and you're charging someone else to inject that traffic. So either you charge them more and give me a piece of it, or your traffic will degrade. Okay, so it's going to be interesting to see who has more power. The people sending the traffic or the people paying for the cost of distributing the traffic, because there's certainly going to be a battle here if this situation is actually happening. All right, so on the positive side, because so far this has been more of about the problems that we have, I think that there's three things that are happening that are good for the telco industry. One is, to some extent, we still have customer relationships. And even though we have a risk of those customer relationships moving completely away from us to Apple, Google, Facebook, or these guys, still, we do have the customer relationship. I do have customer names in my database. I know how to build them, where they live, how much they consume, et cetera, et cetera. So I have the relationship with them, and I have also the data about what they do. And if we are smart about using that asset, that's a huge asset. We'll probably have to build something else. It's not that we are going to give them better connectivity because of that, but that's an asset that a lot of companies will pay for. And in fact, a lot of companies approach telcos because of that particular asset, the capability of knowing who the customer is, the billing relationship, the information about the services usage we have about them, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And then the third one, which is digitalization. What I mean by that is that the more everything is becoming digital and the more people are permanently connected to the internet, if we think on the internet terms of saying, well, if there is usage, monetization will come, then we have the usage, because at the end of the day, things flow through our networks, and having the customer relationship and having the data about them is an opportunity to get into new services spaces that are adjacent to connectivity. So I think that we should not just think that the world is riddled with problems and that telcos are doomed, but it's quite the opposite. I think there's a lot of opportunities. One of them that I just wanted to mention here is what we call cloud communications. Okay, so if you think about voice today, is the worst integrated piece of content and service in the world. Why I'm saying this? Because it's very difficult to add voice capabilities to anything. Okay, so voice is still within the operator realm. VoIP is something that is complex, so some companies have managed to do it successfully, but it's not for small startup to do that. But there's some companies, as included, so the third column, Confo and Bluevia, those are products that Telefonica is building that are looking at how we can integrate voice and messaging and network capabilities with the web. So in other words, why you guys want to go to eBay, you want to sell your car on eBay, why you don't have a simple way of clicking here, being able to issue a new phone number that you post it on eBay saying, please, if you want to acquire this car, please call me to this number. It's a temporary number that you will set up how you want to reroute it to your real phone number, or how you want to store it in a voicemail that you will access from the web and listen to the messages that people have recorded, et cetera, et cetera. This seems obvious that you should be able to do these things, but it's not happening. It's not happening because of cost and because of easiness of integration and all of that, especially because of the not being very web developer friendly. So the telcos are not very web developer friendly, and by not having services that are, and this is an example of a web developer friendly code. Okay, so this is how we do it in Bluevia. That's how Twilio, the company is very popular in the US, is doing it. This is a very, very simple way of integrating, sending an SMS from a web app. Okay, so just basically on the web, you will see a button, hit there, put some text, and it will send an SMS to a particular number. If we get our communication capabilities and open them up in a web developer friendly way, then people will start integrating those, and it will retain some of the value that today we have, that if not, it will move away somewhere else, because people will choose other ways of communicating. And think that at the end of the day, voice is a very good way to communicate with people. It's much better than text in some situations, and the fact that Apple is moving towards a voice-based interface like Siri is kind of proving the point. The SMS still has the value of being 100% interoperable, which nothing else has. So WhatsApp is interoperable to the extent that both have installed the application, but if you're on a website and you want to send text to someone, either you have their email, which also is the other 100% universal interoperable, or if you want the immediacy of making sure it reaches the person, doesn't matter where they are, what connectivity they have, what phone they have, then SMS is the best way to do it. But we need to facilitate usage of these things, because otherwise they will disappear and they will be replaced by more convenient alternatives. Okay, so to finish up with a couple of slides. So what we've done in Telefonica in a very, very high level is basically say, okay, we have two problems, mainly. One is efficiency, because our traditional business is maturing and the cost of providing the same service is growing, but the users are not growing. So you have to be more efficient. So these guys here, Caetano, is the guy that will make sure that that doesn't happen. So that decoupling curve, at least from the cost side, it doesn't happen, because we figure out how to be more efficient and leverage our global scale. So my role is on the other side of figuring out how we can leverage all the assets we have as a telco to provide new services that will grow the business with something else that is not just connectivity, voice of messaging. So I think this is a very simple way of putting things, but is in fact the main reasoning. And then, you know, the Europe and Latin America are our two main markets with two, you know, business units dedicating to, you know, commercialization and customer support in all those regions. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what Telefonica has done. It's the first telco that has decided to organize this way. I think that tells a lot about us, and actually I was pleasantly surprised because I think it's a very simple organization and very clear of who needs to do what and who has to focus on what. And whether we're going to be successful or not, yet to be seen. This has been done very recently, and I think that you know, a lot of people think that we're kind of crazy as an operator of doing this, especially I will say more on the digital services side than on the other side, because operators doesn't have a very good track record or being successful besides connectivity, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So certainly chances of success are less than 100%, but I think they're better than in the past, because we already had a lot of assets. We have already been working a lot towards both directions, towards centralizing more everything that has to do with networks and IT, and towards putting more effort in terms of building digital services. And in any case, this is the future. This is what's going to happen no matter what. So the telco industry, the traditional telco industry, is going to, is going to stop growth and is going to become more expensive, and digital services are where the growth is happening. So if we want to ignore that, that's fine, but if we don't and we need to embrace what's happening on the industry, then that's probably the most sensible thing to do. Now, my last slide. What can we do with the network on the digital services side? And this is for you guys, because you're the network experts. My first disclaimer is I'm a computer scientist, so network for me is an abstraction layer that sits somewhere there and someone is managing that, but I just use internet protocols and provide services, and I don't have to care about understanding that a network is there, because, and that's the approach that everyone that is building services on the internet does. They just basically don't think that there is a network somewhere, but they think that internet connectivity is available and internet protocols facilitate you communicate, and that has been the most successful way of providing services. If you look at who is dominating in any internet service category, there is no telco in the world that actually dominates one internet category, okay? So what can we do with that? So is the network an asset to be competitive on digital services, or is not? Because it's certainly an asset for connectivity, there's no doubt about it, but what about services? And another thing that, an answer I hear frequently, and I just wanted to put the question before you give me that answer, because I already heard that answer before, is about quality of service. Well, the network can provide quality of service, and my question is, so what? Because if we continue building faster networks, the faster we build networks, the least relevant quality of service is going to be. And what has happened with 3G and messaging is a proof of it. So WhatsApp, if they fix their scalability problems, which have nothing to do with quality of service on the network, it's just basically bad backend development. If they fix that, in terms of quality of service to send messages across the internet with a 3G connection, is good enough. There's no more quality of service you need. If you think of voice, it's still not there, but it's getting there. If you think of video, for video calls or video streaming, it's certainly not there, but it will get there when we deploy LTE and we have less latency and we have faster connectivity. So what do we do with that? Do we ignore that even if we work for a telco, or do we try to leverage it some way? Okay, the second one is about cost. Okay, so this is more for Cayetano than for me, but what can we do with the cost of deploying and operating a network? Because certainly, if the traffic continue growing and the revenue is not growing or is declining, then there is this decoupling that I mentioned to you, which makes the current internet model sustainable. So there's two answers to that. One is you change the internet model, so nothing related to technology, but more related about business and about agreements, and about who pays for what. Or the other one is technology fixes the problem, which so far that's what has happened. So technology somehow has fixed the problem and has always made networks that are a lot cheaper, and therefore we haven't worried too much about trying to monetize that cost somewhere else because we were making enough money with what we were doing. Okay. Now my third question is about mobile, because if you look at the statistics I gave you, and if I think about what I do, I primarily use mobile devices most of my day. So is everything going to be mobile? Do we need to care about the fixed line business. So is it fixed line only to get video entertainment services at home and that's it, and everything else is going to be mobile? Because in many instances it looks like it's going to be that way. But if not, then we have an asset which is the fixed line network that we could be using for something else. The fourth one is about access services. So if you think about connectivity and access services, they've been the same ones throughout forever and ever. So I saw recently that Verizon announced something that Cayetano is looking at how can we replicate it. That is an API for developers that's called Verizon Boost, I think. Verizon Boost, which I thought was really interesting because we've looked at, in my team, together with his team, we've looked at something similar, which basically means through PCRF, I believe this is what they're using. So through the PCRF, you can control a quality of service in a part of the network from mobile apps. And then what they're basically giving is an app to developers that in your app, you hit the Verizon Boost. And then when you hit that, it reserves more bandwidth, and then the app suddenly gets a boost in speed, and it goes a lot faster. I thought that this was very interesting because it's kind of an access service that you're giving to developers that, let's say, you are on a mobile app that has video content, let's say a newspaper app or whatever, and once you're going to get the video, it tells you, if you give me 1 cent more, then I'll give you a boost, and your video will be HD, and your video will get to you a lot faster. So I thought that was very interesting. Now, if I take my Telefonica hat off, with my Telefonica hat, that's very interesting. If I put my developer hat on and look at that, I think, yeah, that's interesting, but then this means it's only going to work in one country, and it's only going to work for 30% of the customers. So why will I bother to integrate my application for something that I will distribute globally? I will distribute it to all the users. Anyone can install it, but then unless you're in Verizon, then that's not going to work. Why would I bother to maintain 2 different versions of my applications, or why would I bother to give a different experience to one customer versus the other one? Shouldn't I wait for everyone to upgrade their networks? Because if the network quality is crap in Verizon, it's also probably crap in AT&T or somewhere else, and therefore the user experience they're not expecting anything better from anyone, and just wait for all of them to upgrade more or less simultaneously their networks, and then my application will improve by itself. And that's kind of what I hear from developers when I talk to them, is the problem we have as operators and using the network is the footprint we have and the coverage we have, because it's not something global that we can provide, and that makes it more complicated for them to use. Okay? And the final one is about customer data. Okay, so we have a lot of customer data, or at least a lot of the potential to capture customer data. We have very little information, so you need to turn data into information, and we need to figure out what kind of data we can capture from the networks, how to capture it efficiently, how to distill it, how to also store it somewhere else so we can look at past patterns when something else happens, but we want to look at why that particular thing happened in the past, et cetera, et cetera. So that's highly related to the network because it implies putting probes, it implies putting better DPIs, it implies better information and intelligence about what happens on the network, which could be used for services, but also for better network planning, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Good. So anyone wants to answer any of these questions? This is my last slide. So if you have any other question for me?
Hello. Sergey Gorinsky, Institute MD Networks, Madrid. So you mentioned a couple of times in your talk that the video unbalance flows in the video have some implication for costs. So it's very common sentiment. I don't really understand it. So maybe you can explain to me better why is that happening? Why does it matter for Telefonica, for the costs of Telefonica, which your traffic goes from left to right or from right to left?
Well, so basically, if there's more traffic coming into our network, we have to upgrade the link to cope for the traffic, and then we have to upgrade the internal network to be more efficient to distributing the traffic. So if the traffic is balanced, there's nothing you can do about it. So the cost is there anyway. Okay, it's who is generating the cost that's the difference. So if you think about them, how voice works, if I place a phone call to you, then let's say international that goes through multiple carriers, then everyone takes a piece of the call and pass it over, and it pays a little bit of what the money originally and it distributes along the chain. And the same thing the other direction, okay? Now with internet traffic, that's not the situation. So internet traffic today is not something that, so the one that needs to inject the traffic at a particular point needs to pay for it, okay? But then once the traffic flows internally, because of peer agreements, no one else is monetizing that, okay? So if I have a peer agreement with you, I'm sending you, 10 gigabytes of traffic, and you send me 10 gigabytes of traffic, I cannot tell you, please pay me for those 10 gigabytes of traffic, otherwise I'm not just going to take them, because you will tell me the same. Well, then I'm not taking your 10 gigabytes of traffic, and because we're sending each other the same amount of traffic, the agreement in the past was, okay, we won't charge each other. Now the situation is different, because I can tell you, I'm not going to take your 10 gigabytes of traffic. My link is only for 5 gigabytes, and your traffic will, slow down to 50% of the speed, because upgrading my link to 10 gigabytes of traffic will degrade your traffic, your quality. Now, can we do that or not? That's the question, because this impacts our users as well. Okay, so my user will then feel that whatever service is using, the quality is not very good. So two things can happen here. One is the user doesn't care and moves to another service. So instead of using, let's say, Megaupload, you use RapidShare, and that's it. And then Megaupload suffers, and then is incentivized to pay me. Or the user moves from Movistar to Vodafone. Okay, because it says, wow, Movistar connectivity is crap, let's move to Vodafone. Okay, so the whole discussion there is who has more power on the value chain. Because whoever has, and this is economic theory, but if you look at the number of players in each part of the value chain, depending on how many players are there, you dilute the power. So if there's 3 telcos, so it's 1/3 for each, but there's only one, let's say, search engine Google, then I cannot take the traffic from Google, because there's no other Google. So users will then move away from me because they want to retain Google. But if there's 10 video services or 10 direct download sites, then they have less power. And that's the whole debate.
I understand why the traffic volume matters and why market power matters, but I don't understand why the direction of traffic matters. So if, let's say, Akamai sends traffic to your customers, right? And it's unbalanced traffic, they send much more data. And yes, you mentioned some hypothetical example when Akamai just receives the data and doesn't send anything back. From your perspective as an operator, it shouldn't matter. You still send the same amount of data, just a different direction. So I know, I understand the industry uses this notion.
So the link, and I don't know if the link has to be this big, independently of where the traffic comes from, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, so, I'm saying that doesn't really matter which way it goes. You have the provision, whatever the rate is. So it doesn't really matter.
That's so you need to provision for the size of the pipe, let's say, independently of where the traffic is going, this direction or the other direction. Yeah. Now, my point is, let's say I know the amount of the size of the pipe I need is 10 gigabytes. Okay. But I decide to put it to provision only for 5 gigabytes because I want to save cost. Then I'm screwing someone in terms of traffic performance, right? If the traffic comes from one direction, I know who's that one. So that's the one I can tell, look, I need to provision a bigger pipe, then you pay me for it. If the traffic is flowing both directions, I'm screwing myself as well. That's the point. So if the traffic is unbalanced, then you have someone that is responsible for you provisioning a bigger network. And then you can go and talk to the guy and say, look, you're monetizing this traffic, I'm not monetizing the traffic, so let's do something about it.
I see.
Otherwise, both suffer.
Okay.
So finally, the decoupling, I guess, has become part of the thought process. Being in this topic for a couple of years now, and it's very refreshing to see embrace the challenge. Now, I think you've done a fantastic job of looking at all the opportunities to, monetize and power relations and who can extract money from whom. My problem is when we look at the predictions of 30 times traffic, and if we take even a small fraction, if we say the cost of the infrastructure perhaps grows at 1/10 of the actual traffic carried, and probably the fraction is much bigger. then we're still talking about somebody tripling their contribution to the ecosystem. Now, we know the ARPU is far from having any hope of tripling. I don't know whether the content generators, Hollywood or whoever it is willing to part with that kind of money to make it viable. And so, in short, isn't it possible that we've created an expectation that this 35 times growth is based on of things that people have now an image, a vision of what they would like to do, but it's perhaps not economically viable to deliver it at a price point that people can afford, regardless of who is putting the money to whom. I mean, and that's going to be very cruel, and the market is going to sort it out. But at the end of the day, there is no guarantee that we can afford, say, everybody to retire at age 40. It just won't happen.
So I agree with you, and this is one of the primary reasons why network deployment is slow. So because there's no business case for deploying massive deployment of fiber. Okay, so it doesn't matter how much Cisco says the traffic is going to grow on video, that will not happen unless you deploy networks. Now, these traffic predictions tend to come from network gear vendors, which some of you probably are on the table, which are obviously incentivized to sell network gear. But operators are also doing their own business planning, and they're saying, look, exactly what you're saying. I'm going to deploy fiber. I'm a dominant operator like Telefonica in Spain. Most of my customers are not new. Most of the customers, I won't be able to extract much more money for additional speed because their expectation is I'm going to give them more speed anyway for the same price. So why should I spend the money? So I lived in Japan when SoftBank did the unbundled local loop for NTT. And then SoftBank completely, trashed the market. So it started giving 10 megabits connection for VDSL, then 20, then 30. So in that situation, what happened is that NTT started losing market share very, 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 very quickly. And then they started the massive fiber deployment. Now they did it at the same price point. So you could choose SoftBank VDSL for, I don't know, it was like 2,500 yen or whatever it was at that time, or you could choose NTT fiber, which from day one they give it to 100 megabits per second at the same price. So that economically is not viable, and it completely destroyed the market. Because if you look at NTT, what used to be and what it is today, partly the reason they're not doing very well is because of that, but they had nothing else to do. So what could happen is that those network predictions are true, and we're forced for competitive reasons to deploy networks because there's always entrant players that are willing to, to make less money or to give away things to gain market share. But it will destroy the industry to some extent because it will make the companies a lot less profitable, meaning, less jobs, meaning less people, less capacity to invest somewhere else, to expand geographically, et cetera, et cetera. So either we don't do it and we hold on and say, we're not going to give more connectivity, or if we are forced to do it because of competitive pressure, it is not going to be in an economically viable model. So.
You mentioned the alternative models, mostly from Asia and some emerging economies, where an option that you didn't mention is the nation starts treating video delivery or broadband mobile as a civil infrastructure, and the government pays for it. But I guess in the Europe zone and America, this is really far from the economic realities we can imagine for a few decades.
If you talk about NTT in Japan, you're to some extent talking about the government, because as you know, it's partly owned by the government, so that's one of the reasons they do it. What the government specifically did in Japan is to pay for the development of high-speed infrastructure in rural areas where, there's not going to be a viable model anyway. And then they left the urban areas for competition of the operators. Yes, certainly the governments can go and build the stuff, but I don't think that's going to happen in Europe, especially now with the financial situation. It's going to be quite the opposite. The government is going to try to extract more money from operators with spectrums and things like that. So.
Hi, my name is Javier González from Huawei Technologies. You have mentioned several times about the Telefonica, in this case, owning the relationship with the customer. You talked there about the customer data. I would like to ask you your opinion about the RCSE as a way as a way to monetize this or to fight against OTT with this. You are part of the G5, but in the market is a debate right now whether RCSE really is the solution or is the window has passed already. So what's your opinion? Thank you.
What do you want, my opinion or the Telefonica official opinion?
You can give me both if you want.
But why don't you give the official Telefonica one?
Official Telefonica one is that what we stated in E5, and we are pushing for RCS. There are several opinions if RCS is arriving late or not. There's a bet, and we think that we have to play that bet. Okay. Another thing is that especially in developed countries, we can arrive late. In some other countries, for instance, Latin, there's a huge opportunity because penetration of the smartphone is not so high, so you can have a good opportunity there. Carlos' opinion is a bit more radical, so Carlos, go ahead.
So let me not focus on trashing RCS, but just telling you about my overall skepticism of standards for software-based products. Okay, so and this is for software-based products. So I think standards for network and stuff is certainly needed because everything needs to interoperate, etc. But let's talk about standards for things that you can provide through pure software deployments. The theoretical advantage, and I mentioned that on my talk, but if you talk to people and say why standards like RCS exist, and they tell you there are three reasons. One is quality of service, because being on a standard, everyone is going to deploy it on the networks the same way, and it's going to guarantee quality of service. The second one is native user experience, because it's integrated with the handset, because telcos will force every handset manufacturer to implement it and implement it natively on the phones, like SMS is implemented natively on the phones today. And the third one is interoperability, okay, because it's a standard. And therefore, being standard is interoperable because everyone will deploy it and all handset manufacturers will implement it and all telcos will deploy the network gear to do it. Now, if you think about whether that's going to be true or not, then you're going to start seeing my opinion. Because I don't think that today handset manufacturers will necessarily deploy a standard just because telcos say that is an industry standard, because unfortunately our role in the value chain is not what it used to be, okay? Then not all the telcos are going to deploy it at the same time, so interoperability is not going to be guaranteed unless everyone deploys it. And then native user experience integrated on the handset is questionable unless the other things happen. Now, if you look at alternatives, how could you do that? You could do that by a download of a native app, okay, in smartphones. And in fact, RCS is going to do that as well. So why? Well, because if you have a native app, it's natively integrated on the handset because the SDKs of smartphones allow you to provide native integrations. It's interoperable because I download it, you download it, so we interoperate. That's the WhatsApp situation. And quality of experience, quality of service, let's say for something like messaging, is not really needed today. Okay, then if you have that situation, why would you restrict yourself to a standard? Because the internet moves so fast that by the time we have the new whatever enhancement to RCS, WhatsApp is going to scratch your back while you're messaging or something like that, because they will have 20 developers building something and putting it out there. So my skepticism of standards is that they don't provide any true competitive advantage, and second, they are not going to be able to move fast enough precisely because they are standards. That's and I think it's a very reasonable skepticism to have. And if you look at how many years we've been defining RCS, and it still is not there, that's something to be concerned about it. As Cayetano said, we're going to give a try, because why not? And we already deploy IMS in some countries. But I'm concerned about whether that's going to be successful. Was it that politically correct? Or?
Very politically correct. More than usually, Okay.
I'm supposed to manage the RCS project now, by the way.
So I think we're running out of time. I guess one more question, and then we will start with it.
He was raising his hand, the first one, and he's been...
Over here.
Okay, can we do this too quickly?
Okay, too quickly.
Hi, this is This is Xavier from NEC in Heidelberg, Germany. I didn't see much about something Telefonica used to talk in the past of net neutrality, and basically...
It is hidden.
Okay. So I was wondering, there was in the past some discussion on degrading some applications, let's say, that were creating a lot of volume but were not giving a lot of value for operators. Now the game has changed to saying, okay, we just have kind of best effort for everyone, but for certain applications, if they would like to pay, they will get a better performance, so it's inverse. But is it still something you're considering, or it's just too difficult because of regulation?
So I don't think that there has ever been too much degrading of applications in the Telefonica network anywhere. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've been particularly aggressive doing that. We've been very cautious in terms of how much bandwidth we provided to avoid some applications to take over the traffic, like in Spain, uplink in ADSL has been always controlled, so peer-to-peer, when it used to be popular, was not dominating the network traffic and things like that, but not throttling peer-to-peer or not throttling VoIP or things like that. I don't think that we've been that. Other operators like Vodafone have been a lot more aggressive. So,
in fact, when we measure other operators, they are doing these things, but we in Telefonica, we are not doing that type of things.
In fact, we even had, Pablo's team even had a network analysis tool for peer-to-peer traffic that we could actually analyze peer-to-peer traffic in other operators' network, and we could see how they were throttling, like British Telecom in the UK was throttling big time, and we were not doing that. So I don't think that we've ever been that. Then in terms of net neutrality, the problem with net neutrality is the definition of net neutrality. So if I put my internet hat, what do I want from the net neutrality perspective? Well, I want two things. One is that there is no discrimination. So any website that I go can come to me unless it's illegal content or illegal or child pornography or things like that. But besides those special cases that anyone can put a server on the internet and can reach any customer, and I'm not being penalized against other services. Now, being penalized against other services versus giving more capacity to one particular service are two different things. And it's very funny that people complain when operators, internet people, complain when operators say that I'm going to give more bandwidth to this service or I'm going to give higher quality of service to this service without throttling the other one, okay? When CDNs are actually designed to do that. So if you have more money, you can buy better CDN capacity, and then you get a better quality of service. So the fact that, you know, with money, you can buy quality of service is always something that exists on the internet industry. And when we announced this year that we're going to the market with our own CDN, there was a lot of, uninformed people on the internet posting saying, oh, Telefonica is breaking the net neutrality. And I was very adamant on internet and saying, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Actually, El País posted, had an article saying that, and I said the guy is an ignorant because, you know, trying to provide services for whoever has the money or has the willingness to invest in terms of having a good user experience, leverage the fact that we have networks and servers, etc. I don't think that goes against net neutrality. And that's kind of what is on the debate. It's not explicitly says that, but it's a little bit of my discussion about mention CDNs and mention decoupling and charging content providers.
But do you see it as a big source of revenue in the future, like Google, Facebook, and company interested for competitive reasons to just offer better service? So
I think so, because they are doing it already. Google is spending tons of money building its own CDN. Because they know, unless the quality of experience or using Google is not good, people will move to another service over time. So I think they do. Now, the problem is, a CDN is a very good value proposition because it's cheap, it's global, et cetera, operators today offer different kind of experience, and that's what I mentioned. The Verizon case, from a developer perspective, is less attractive than, let's say, using Akamai, because using Akamai will work everywhere. Using the Verizon Boost API, it will only work in the US for Verizon users. But if we as operators manage to move to more global ways of doing it via interconnectivity alliances or just deploying global infrastructure, then I think internet companies for sure will be interested. I don't know any internet company that doesn't use CDNs, because it's impossible. So, okay, last question quickly here.
Robert Baldemeyer, Ericsson. There are several forecasts that we will have in the future many billions of connected devices, machine-to-machine type communication, and not all of them are probably end up in an operator's network, but probably a substantial part. And I mean, maybe there is not a huge revenue per device, but since there are so many devices and several of them are also, I mean, rather stable, which would then probably also translate into a stable income for an operator. How do you see the chance for an operator to monetize on machine-to-machine services?
We do. And actually, I had one slide about that, but then I thought I had too many slides, so I took it. My talk last year actually talked a little bit about machine-to-machine. I think that's another of the big opportunities outside, let's say, the more traditional consumer. I think there today, basically what we're doing is selling SIMs for machines with a very cheap cost per gigabyte and providing tools to manage all these SIMs throughout the world. But I think we need to move beyond that, look at sensor networks, look at connected devices, look at the Internet of Things, meaning day-to-day things that are connected to the Internet and how can we provide connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities operators have. And if I don't have here the list of, in any slide, the list of our top priorities, but it's on the top 5 priorities, machine-to-machine is definitely there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys.
Okay,
All right, sorry for taking so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.